I would say good morning. My name is Charlie Ramsden. I am here this morning while Bill and Sylvia enjoy a little Thanksgiving time off in Texas. I believe they will be back on Friday and be here next Sunday with you. I also would introduce Lena Casellas, who greeted you this morning without giving you her name, but that's in the bulletin too. I'm sure you will welcome her to St. Paul's as you have welcomed me. Let me start this morning by telling you a little story from a trip that I recently had. Rather amazing, at least to me. Went on a little junket to Europe and spent some days in Paris. Now, what do you do when you go to Paris, when you're my age? Go to art museums. And so we went to art museums, a couple of them, and ended up at the Louvre. And of course, when you go to the Louvre, you have to see the Mona Lisa. So I found it, and I stood there and I looked at it, and I thought to myself, why is that painting so famous? Why is it perhaps the most valuable painting in the world? What is so special about it? And I looked and I looked and I looked and I thought, and people came and went and came and went, and I'm looking and trying to figure this out, and suddenly it came to me. It was Audrey Hepburn. Just a little way that your mind can alter your perceptions, that you can see things that make sense in one frame of reference when you're not in that frame of reference at all. I'll leave that there because we could go in that direction. It'd be much more interesting than King of Kings Sunday, but let's wave the flag and do what we're told to do at least one more time. We celebrate Christ the King this day. It's a very unusual Sunday for that to happen. Usually Christ the King is finished and gone, and as we get to Thanksgiving, the secular holiday. And so we thank God for all of our many blessings this morning, but shift our attention slightly to the theme of Christ the King, which is, I believe, an exceedingly difficult concept for most of us. In New Testament times, in our own times, the king, the monarch, the dictator, the queen, whoever it is who is in great power, is a strong leader and the leader of a strong military. It's true in our country, it's true in countries around the world. We have seen it in what we have euphemistically called the Arab Spring. The person who is in charge is the commander-in-chief, is the military dictator who has legions and forces and armaments and resources available to defend against any invasion or to invade when necessary. And so if we call Jesus a king, in that context, we are giving him attributes, we're giving him characteristics, we are giving him personality traits which he absolutely did not exhibit in his earthly ministry. A king, certainly not in the conventional terms, certainly not in terms that would have made sense in biblical times. Our New Testament lesson gets us started to this consideration. It's from the Revelation to John. And I will tell you what you probably already know, and that is it is always a little hazardous to read the Revelation of John in church, especially out loud, because people will be drawn to take some of the images in the Revelation of John and give them current, contemporary currency, say that's exactly what's happening now, and lead them to the most disastrous of conclusions. So there's a better way to read Revelation, and I offer that to you this morning. It is to see Revelation as a series of vignettes, perhaps skits or very brief one-act plays, morality plays put on by the Christian community in the early centuries of the Common Era, trying to express in some ways the truth that has been revealed to them. It's easy to read it this way because so many places in Revelation you get the stage directions and the script built in, and that is true this morning as well. We see a stage that is set before us. We see a throne. The throne is empty. I don't think anyone in those days would be presumptuous enough to sit in that throne. And then there are 7 spirits and Jesus, probably actors in costumes who have some specific role or action that they take or words that they say to reveal what their spirit is. And if we look at it that way and we see those, there are at least three of those lines of dialogue that are there that will let us know the kind of characteristics that they are attributing to Jesus. 3 titles in that reading from Revelation. The first is Faithful Witness. Now that's bang right on. Jesus says over and over again in the New Testament, I have come to bear witness to the truth that comes from my Father. I have come to tell you about the relationship which exists between the Creator and the created order. I have come to put away all of the bits and pieces which have crept into that equation and do not belong there. Faithful witness, right on the money. The second one is Firstborn of the dead. Now that's a little problematic. Of course, the author of Revelation is trying to talk about the resurrection and the crucifixion and resurrection, the death to life part in Jesus' life and ministry. But that's not the only time that happened in the New Testament. There are several places where Jesus will visit someone who is presumed to have died and restore them to health and life. We understand what it's about, but it's not quite as strong as the first one. And then we get to the third attribution of character, and that is ruler of the kings of the earth. In biblical times, that's very dangerous, because in those days, the ruler of the kings of the earth was Caesar, at least of the Roman Empire, at least of the area in which Jesus lived and conducted his ministry. And for anyone to claim that they are the equivalent or perhaps the superior of Caesar is very hazardous to their health. Yet the scene is set in this way, and it leads us to talk about the monarchy kind of as a form of governance. The question, of course, is what is the preferred? What is the superior? What is the best form of governance? Is it something like the general election procedure we go through in this country, or an inherited monarchy? Social scientists who study this say that absolutely the best form of governance is to have the monarch or the person who's in charge to be very benevolent. The benevolent dictator, the benevolent monarch, the one who is interested primarily in the welfare of their subjects, one who rules with compassion and truth. This is the ideal form of governance, but unfortunately history does not give us any examples of monarchs or dictators who behave in that way. And certainly not, moving to the gospel lesson, Pontius Pilate. Benevolent, compassionate, concerned, none of the above. Pilate is an agency of the Roman state, a deputy of Caesar who has been sent to, for whatever it is that he has done wrong before, has been sent to what he would probably see as the end of the earth, or a little bit beyond the end of the earth. Not exactly the position which he coveted, and he has been sent there to subdue the native population, to collect taxes in order to complete the impressive building program that was going on in Rome, and to keep things under control, which generally meant under his thumb. If he was able to keep control, if he was able to keep the native population from becoming energized, then certainly he could extract the kinds of tributes that he needed to extract in order to perform his responsibilities. Does Pilate have any real interest in Jesus? I think absolutely none. Pilate doesn't care much about him. He probably has heard reports of some traveling evangelist out in the countryside who is exciting the people, but not enough to concern him or to even connect him with the person who is before him. Pilate is not at all concerned with Jesus. In fact, he is not even concerned with whether or not Jesus has committed a crime, certainly a crime that would befit crucifixion. Our gospel narrative unfolds. Pilate has a problem. The governors of the temple, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the chief priests, have come to him accusing this man, bringing this man to him as a treasonous person. And Pilate has to deal with him. What a problem. What to do, what to do. There is some dialogue between Pilate and Jesus in our reading this morning from John. And Pilate at one point seems a little bit interested in Jesus, perhaps because Jesus is not behaving as if he is just scared as possible, and more likely perhaps because Jesus is sitting there telling Pilate the truth, which may never have happened before. Jesus is speaking the truth to Pilate, a rare experience for any Roman governor. Now, we read in other places in the gospel, not in our reading this morning, that Pilate is taken enough by Jesus to offer to release him to the crowd, and the crowd, again stirred up by the chief priests and the Pharisees and Sadducees, saying, no, we'd rather have you release the criminal for us. But Pilate is set with this perplexing problem of what to do with this person who is before him, and decided that probably it was good policy to execute someone who started to stir up the native population. That was the way they maintained order in Rome, as a matter of fact. There were you feed a few alleged troublemakers to the lions at the Colosseum, and the level of dissension among the general population drops almost to zero. So Pilate ordered the execution, never thinking twice about what was right or wrong or issues such as guilt or innocence. He ordered the execution, and we all know the rest of the story of how it came to pass. But Pilate's question to Jesus remains. He asks him very forcefully, "Are you a king?" More specifically, the ruler of the kings of the world, perhaps. And Jesus answers him in a way which is clearly no and yes. Remember, in biblical times, the king was the mighty warrior, the great military leader, the one who was able to conquer neighboring kingdoms, to defend against any invasion, to keep control of the people. Jesus, by that standard, was absolutely not a king in any way at any time that we know of. If anything, he was the opposite. He had no use for earthly kings who would lord it over their subjects and make their lives miserable. He would never use the word king to describe earthly ministry. We would never use the word king to describe the earthly ministry of Jesus or his teaching. It is only a word that would be used to describe Jesus by those who wished to see him executed, or perhaps those who participated in the morality plays like we read in the Revelation of John. But in Jesus' self-definition, it is quite different. He says very, very clearly to us, "I was born and came into this world to testify to the truth, to proclaim God's love of all his creation, of all of the children of God, and to encourage the children of God to treat each other with kindness, with compassion, in ways that reflect love. This is the kind of king that history has never recorded for us, the benevolent monarch or dictator that would be the first choice as governor, the ruler who is servant of all. So why the confusion? Why the yes and no? I think it is all a matter of expectations. For generations, perhaps millennia, the Jewish people had waited for a Messiah, and they assumed that this Messiah would be that great kingly military leader who would bring legions of angel warriors and probably chariots with horses to liberate them from their struggle under Roman oppression or whoever was the occupying force at that time. This was so deeply ingrained in the people who followed Jesus, who heard his words and believed them, perhaps including even the disciples. That was so ingrained in them that somehow they were able to harmonize their expectation and their experience. And I would not be at all surprised, in fact, I believe there is great reason to believe, that many of the disciples assumed that when Jesus was executed, he would come down from the cross as that military leader and they would be off and running. If I, looking at the Mona Lisa, can see Audrey Hepburn, how easy would it be for those people in the Holy Lands in biblical times to see their expectations as clearly acted out before their very eyes? Was Jesus a king? Not in any worldly way that we know and understand. His kingship was much more difficult to understand because his royal command, the standard which he expected, was that we love God with all our hearts and all our souls and all our minds, and that we love ourselves and our neighbors equally. It's the summary of the law. It's the message which he came to proclaim. It's the message that somehow we always try to extrapolate to a point beyond its usefulness, as in our gospel reading this morning. But it is true for us and for all of God's children all our days. Perhaps our task this morning, perhaps the point for meditation this week, is to try to ask ourselves what it would look like if we would start to live as that benevolent dictator. If we were to take upon ourselves the goal of interacting with God's children whom we encounter in ways that show our respect and love for them and compassion for their situation. What a different world it would be if people who had heard Jesus' words had adopted his standard as the gold standard of behavior for all of God's people. How much better our world would be and have been for 2,000 years. But perhaps the good news is it is never too late to start. Next Sunday we begin the season of Advent, a season of preparation for Christmas. And I invite you to contemplate in some very real way the ways in which you might mirror the life and ministry of Jesus in your own life as you prepare for the festival of his birth. Amen.